I just watched an interview with actress Allison Mack on Michael Rosenbaum's podcast. And if you were a Smallville fan, I'm sure it was surreal to see Superman's best friend and sidekick, Chloe Sullivan, sitting across from Lex Luthor. But instead of nostalgia or superhero stories, the pair unraveled the aftermath of one of the most disturbing and documented cult scandals of our time.
I'm not afraid I'm a fanatic. And the only thing that fanatics fear is disillusionment. I so deeply believed that what I was doing was righteous and good and powerful.
Even if you've never been involved in anything extreme, the emotional dynamics inside the interview are strangely familiar. Most of us know what it feels like to slowly drift from our center, to let other people's opinions override our inner knowing, because we want something to be true. At times, we all seek belonging or purpose in the wrong places, and try to build an identity around expectations that were never ours to begin with. Allison Mack's story is the extreme version of a very human pattern. How does one who has fallen so hard and caused so much harm begin the long climb back? In this video, I want to break down what stood out to me in Allison's interview, not to judge her, not to defend her, but to explore the psychological, emotional, and spiritual patterns underneath a very public collapse and possible redemption arc. But first, if you're new here, welcome. I'm Trill. I'm a conscious creator and a high-vibe music artist. My project, Harmonic Convergence, is an emotional and musical exploration of the 8 frequencies we all move through as human beings. Right now, we're in the frequency of falter, the chapter where we disconnect from inner guidance, make painful choices, and confront the shadow aspects of ourselves. So, if you could use a little inspiration today, hit the like and subscribe, and let's dive in. To understand why this Allison Mack interview hit so hard, we need to acknowledge the magnitude of what she was involved in and the nature of her involvement. Allison was not just a participant. She became one of the highest-ranking figures in NXIVM, a group that marketed itself as an empowerment and personal development movement. But underneath that veneer was a system that prosecutors later exposed as a coercive sex cult. This wasn't a minor scandal. It was a multi-layered system built on psychological manipulation, emotional dependency, and power. If you want the clearest breakdown of how it operated, I strongly recommend watching both seasons of HBO's The Vow. What shocked the public most were the details around the secret subgroup called DOS, which functioned on a literal master-slave hierarchy. Allison was a master, recruiting slaves who were required to obey her commands. This included handing over collateral such as nude photos, intimate confessions, family secrets, and even financial documents. It was psychological blackmail to ensure obedience. Women were pressured to lose weight, to go without sleep, and cut off relationships, all under the guise of self-mastery. Women were subjected to disturbing rituals, including branding their pelvic area with a cauterizing pen, the symbol of which was the cult founder Keith Raniere's initials. Readiness drills were enforced daily, where members had to respond to commands at any hour of the day, creating a constant state of emotional urgency. Allison Mack was arrested in 2018 and pled guilty to charges which included racketeering. She served 2 years in federal prison. These weren't minor missteps. They were severe violations of trust. And because she once played a character associated with loyalty and moral clarity, the contrast left people stunned. But her interview with Michael Rosenbaum went far beyond the documented facts. It revealed the interior landscape, the mindset, the blind spots, and the slow erosion of self-awareness. And that interior story is where things get complex. One of the strongest threads in the interview was how much Allison's identity was shaped by the entertainment industry. She started acting at 4 years old, long before she had cognitive development to understand boundaries, autonomy, or the difference between praise and love. She learned who she was through other people's reactions, directors, casting agents, and fans. That kind of upbringing creates an identity built on the outer world rather than the inner world. When your sense of self is constructed externally, you become more susceptible to charismatic authority figures who claim to offer guidance. Michael Rosenbaum shared a similar upbringing where attention and external validation became substitutes for unconditional love. Listening to both of them talk, you can see how easily a person raised in that atmosphere might find themselves seeking structure, affirmation, and a sense of purpose.
But I knew who I was based on the reaction I got from my audience. That was how I developed an identity.
Right.
And so when I didn't have a reaction from an audience, I had no idea who I was. So I was constantly seeking an audience, you know?
Me too. Right.
You tell me who I need to be, whether it's through a script or through your perception of me, and I will absolutely fulfill that.
Now, this isn't unique to actors. Many people grow up learning that their worth is connected to what they can provide, whether that's achievement, helpfulness, or emotional caretaking. It doesn't excuse anything that happened later, but it offers context for how a person could be drawn into a structure that gradually replaces their own inner voice. When you never learn to access inner guidance, you seek it outside yourself, sometimes in dangerous places. The more Allison spoke about her years in NXIVM, the clearer it became that her involvement didn't begin with dramatic rituals or obvious red flags. She spent 12 years in the group, and according to her, the first 8 felt as though she was becoming stronger and more confident. The darker parts didn't appear all at once. They crept in slowly. This is the core truth about cults. They don't recruit people with danger. They recruit people with purpose. The goal of every cult leader is to get you to defer your judgment and subscribe to their reality. This is why NXIVM felt empowering to Allison at first. It didn't attack her intuition directly. It reframed discomfort as resistance, and resistance as something she needed to overcome. It taught her to reinterpret her inner warnings as weaknesses. A cult leader can't control you until they first silence the part of you that knows something is wrong.
If I say to you, do you think you were brainwashed?
100%.
100%.
100%.
What red flags, if you look back now, that you might not have noticed because you were in the thick of things, would you make people be aware of? Not to make sure this and this, if it's a self-help, is there anything you can do?
Yeah. The mental landscape is so nuanced and delicate. And we're so flippant with it because we can't touch it and see it. But people should not be messing in your brain unless they have 7 years at least of an education behind them. Teaching them how to be careful, how to be respectful, how to allow you your autonomy. Like, there are so many self-help things out there now, which I think, some of them are really good and are really helpful. But if somebody is insisting on getting really deep into your psyche, they should be licensed.
When your time, social world, finances, emotional capacity, and personal identity begin orbiting one source, you lose perspective, and eventually you lose agency. At its core, cults are simply the extreme expression of something that happens quietly in many environments: the killing of intuition. These patterns don't only appear in cults. They show up in self-help spaces, controlling relationships, and environments where growth is used as justification to break down barriers. These dynamics are much more common than we realize, which is why understanding how they function matters. Allison Mack's drift was slow, but her collapse was instant. One year she was traveling, working, teaching, and living her life. The next year she was under arrest, facing decades in prison, watching her name become synonymous with scandal, and losing nearly every connection she had. She described emotional breakdowns, moments of despair, and the shock of realizing that her identity had been built on illusions she didn't question soon enough. The spiritual community often describes this as an ego death. This was the moment when the external identity she had built, actress, leader, strong woman, helper, collided violently with accountability.
And one of the things I definitely contend with on a regular basis is how did I objectify people to the point where I thought it was okay to take away their autonomy, where I thought it was okay to feel in power of people.
Rock bottom is excruciating, but it's also strangely liberating. When everything collapses, you're left with the truth of who you actually are. Rock bottom removes the roles, the distractions, and the ways we numb ourselves. It forces us to confront the parts of ourselves we had been avoiding for years. And while that process can feel like death, it is often the beginning of a more authentic life. In prison, Allison says she encountered women with deep trauma and almost no support. She saw how the system made people colder and less connected to empathy, and she noticed that same shift happening inside of herself, and it scared her. So she made a conscious decision to stay emotionally open, to cry when she felt the urge, and to keep her heart from shutting down.
I mean, and that's the thing, Michael. We commit crimes because we lose empathy, and empathy is sourced in conscience, which is rooted in feeling. So if you stop feeling because the feelings are too big or you don't have anybody helping you understand how to feel those feelings, you lose your connection to your conscience, which disconnects you completely from empathy. So you are more likely to do a bad thing to somebody else. But instead of giving people permission and support and capacity to feel more and teaching them how to feel those feelings that they need to feel, I mean, rehydrate their humanity that's been completely dehydrated so that they leave with a conscience, we do the opposite.
Yeah.
After she completed her sentence, she chose to rebuild her life in service, studying social work, teaching in prison programs, supporting rehabilitation, and trying to understand the roots of harm. This doesn't erase what she did, but it signals a positive direction. Throughout the interview, Allison spoke about accountability in a way that felt grounded. She didn't minimize the harm. She didn't describe her downfall as something that happened to her, but she also didn't label herself beyond repair. That's an important spiritual distinction, because shame collapses the soul, while accountability strengthens it.
I was a fanatic. I so deeply believed that what I was doing was righteous and good and powerful and transformational and profound, you know, that I was living on 500 calories a day, Michael.
Yeah.
And I was running 5 to 6 miles every morning.
Because that's what Keith wanted.
Because that's what Keith wanted.
While Allison's situation is extreme, the patterns inside it are deeply human. Intuition becomes quiet when identity is shaped externally. Losing yourself happens through small, quiet rationalizations rather than one big moment. And control begins when someone convinces you to override your inner knowing, because it eventually reshapes your entire sense of reality. Allison's story is a case study in what happens when the inner voice is muted, the outer world becomes louder, and identity becomes something shaped rather than self-created. But her recovery is a reminder that even after the deepest missteps, the soul still seeks alignment, sometimes more urgently than ever. Faltering is universal, and while the fall can be devastating, it can also be the doorway to clarity, humility, and a more grounded understanding of who you really are. If this brought up any thoughts or feelings, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. Have you ever lost yourself in a relationship, a belief system, or a community? What do you think about the slow drift that leads people away from themselves? And if you were lost, what helped you find your way back? As always, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, namaste.